Yeah,
or at least halfway decent?
definitely a very busy week.
I had a good one and a busy one as well.
Good. One thing that I particularly enjoy is when other people come up to us and let us know that their priorities are now our priorities and we don't get a choice in it. I really think that that's awesome. When you have a whole bunch of stuff to do yourself and then somebody else comes up and lets you know that that does not matter. That's great. I was demonstrating the use of sarcasm, by the way, for those. Yeah, it's been one of those weeks for me.
Oh man.
Yeah,
I was
we
driving
love
back up here from St. George. I left Sunday at 3:30, and I got here just before 9. And it was each of the mountain passes had slushy ice on them,
oh,
and there were a lot of really. Have you noticed that when the roads get bad, all the really stupid drivers come out?
oh yeah,
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
they're all
and some of
terrible.
these everybody seems to think that four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive means that your car can go up walls, and it just makes me feel sad and weak all over. Anyway, hey, have either of you had an opportunity to look over the module for this week?
I
Um,
haven't looked too in depth into yet.
Okay, Jackson, you did
yeah, I
a
was
little
able to
bit.
go through it.
Okay, and if you can, it's great to at least skim it before our meeting so that you have something to talk about. I think,
Yeah.
and I don't expect you guys to be able to memorize it that quickly. I do know a couple 10-year-olds who have memorized the entire Quran, but that's not something I think I want to do with my life right away, and so I don't expect you guys to either
Well, thank you.
memorize anything that quickly.
Yeah, I don't have that good of a memory.
Well, the the questions that I've gotten through email, somebody asked about where they can find the recordings of the classes. Can either of you tell me where the recordings of the classes are?
I
Are they
honestly
e-
don't know how I found them, but it just popped up in my email, like to find them.
Okay, if you go to our regular page on Canvas and go to the module section, the very first module is attendance, and each week has the recording of that module in that for that week. And to get credit for coming today, all you need to do is go on to that week's module, and about an hour and a half after this class is when I will open the module for this week up. So you can either do it later on tonight or tomorrow, whatever, and just write down 3 things that you learned as we were talking. And if you watch the recording later, then it's 3 things that you learned as you're watching the recording. I have had a couple of people tell me 3 things they learned in the module, and that does not count for attendance because there's a lot of information in the module, and we don't cover all of it in our video. But to be counted for attendance, you've got to write 3 things that shows that you were either present or um, actually stayed awake through most of the video. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm saying this for everybody in the class because you two don't. I'm kind of glad that we don't have like live in person classes sometimes because uh, some students have a tendency to attract the ire of other students because they're not the ones that are asking all the questions. But so I'm glad that this is just on video. I have found that there is a direct correlation between live attendance and good grades in any online class, which I think is interesting. Anyway, this last week's module, I think Jackson, were you the one who asked me about the 6 questions
That might have been.
right before doing the upside down horse drawing?
I I think so. Maybe it was the little the basic drawings. I did
Okay,
ask you a
because
question about it.
um, for the assignments, you just need to turn in what's in the assignment. That's all you're responsible for. And this class was designed for in-person stuff. And if there are other questions like that in the reading areas before you get to the assignment, generally that's to prepare for in-class discussion.
Okay.
So if there's not a place for you to submit the writing, don't even worry about it. All right.
Okay.
And the assignment, somebody else was starting to panic a little bit too, because this week's module, I give you a list of 85 artists to go over, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. But person was panicking because they thought they had to look up each of the 85 artists. And although I am a jerk, I'm not that big of a jerk. And they were also panicking because I mentioned some of the future assignments we're going to be doing with one of the artists in that group. And I just had to explain, everything is not due. There's only two things due with regarding the artist list this time around, and other assignments. As I open up modules, you'll see what to do in future assignments, basically. All right. So today, what we're going to talk about is the inherent need to be creative, practice being creative, and learning about artists. And I also have a note here talk about where are the videos of the class sessions, but we already covered that. Regarding creativity, do you think that there are some people that are just born creative, or do you think that there is a possibility that we can learn to be creative?
Both.
Go
I think
ahead.
that's a good answer. I think that's a good answer. Both. Yeah, I like that. Um, when I was your age, that was shortly after the continent split into several different continents. One of the prevailing thought about uh, brains brain growth was that after you hit 18, your brain cells started dying, and it was just a downhill road from there. And when you hit like 50 or 60, the onset of dementia was pretty much a given. I mean, there was nothing you could do about it. And the prevailing wisdom was everybody agreed that all the test results showed that you could not grow new brain cells or new brain connections. Is that true?
I don't think so. It doesn't sound like it.
No, it's not true. You're absolutely right. Just as the most effective treatment for arthritis, which is important because I have arthritis and a couple of my kids do too, the most effective treatment for arthritis is movement and activity. And can you guess what the single most activity is to keep your brain active and healthy?
Drawing.
Well, it's thinking, it's using your
Oh.
brain. Yeah. And there's something called neuroplasticity, which, but all this leads to the idea that we can learn to be creative. There are definitely some people that are just born with it and they're a little bit wackadoodle, but uh, all of us can learn to be creative. There's two primary directions that creativity can take, and I'll give examples of each one. One is convergent and one is divergent. You guys know who Sherlock Holmes is?
Yeah.
Yeah, he is the most well-known fictional detective in the history of Western world. When he solves cases in the original stories, he would explain things to Dr. Watson as everything was, calming down and the dust was settling. And Conan Doyle made it a point of showing that Sherlock Holmes observed and then made calculated deductions that explained those observations he made to the most, so that their causes were the most practical and simplest fit to what those observations were that he made. And the process he called it ratiocination, which is just another word for rationalization. And so if Sherlock Holmes saw saw somebody, he could tell Dr. Watson, "Oh yes, that person's a clerk and he works long hours." Well, how do you know that? It's because his hair is unkept. He doesn't look like he really takes care of himself like regular ordinary people do. He looks really tired. There's ink stains on his shirt. His shirt is old and worn, and he has ink stains on his hands. So the rationalization of that is the ink stains implies the person could write, and writing implies education. And because what he wore was not expensive and it looked like he was tired, it implied that he was working long hours at a job that was relatively low paying that required education, which a clerk was common. And Dr. Watson would always say, "Oh, well, when you say it like that, it's easy." Well, it's never easy, is it? You have to observe really closely. That's an example of convergent thinking, creativity, though, because it's pretty much a straight line from the observation to the rationalization that explains what it is he's observing. Pretty much a straight line. Now, divergent thinking, this is a little bit different. Have you ever been around a group of really young kids and you ask them to draw something? And each kid, this is especially fun if you ask the kids to draw something immaterial like an emotion, because each kid will do something completely different. If you ask them to draw like a horse or their sister or a parent, there is a general uh, set of shapes that make up the figures for those kinds of things. But if you ask for other other stuff that's a little bit less tangible, each kid will come up with something new or different. Have you ever participated in brain mapping or brainstorming? Have you ever done that?
I don't think so.
Okay, there is brain mapping software. Brainstorming is like if you're in a group and the assignment is to write a paper on something in biology and you have to pick up the subject yourself. One of the fastest ways to come up with something that everybody can agree on is to have your group just start calling out subjects. And the more people call out, the more that opens up the floodgates, the more things you come out with. And then usually, as the suggestions die down, one of the last things to be mentioned is what you end up picking. But that brainstorming, the reason it works, and it's an example of divergent thinking, is you're coming up with all sorts of different ideas. And the longer you do it, the wilder the ideas become and the more creative that they are. One of the classes I taught, I had everybody list 12 textures, which seems kind of daunting, but it was fascinating to me that if I went to each table and made each person or one person at each table call out one or two textures, by the time I went once around the room, suddenly everybody couldn't stop thinking of different textures. It just opened up the floodgates. Another example of divergent thinking is we call that out of the box thinking. So it's kind of sideways. So convergent means basically straight line creativity, like Sherlock Holmes. Divergent means kind of like an explosion or outside of the box. Okay, like a brainstorm. Now, in this, you also have an article and a video to watch. The article, I think it's really interesting. It just mentions device addiction. Have you guys heard of this at all? How
Yeah.
devices are kind of sapping creativity. You have heard of it?
Well,
I
I
have
haven't
noticed.
the creativity, but just that they're a huge distraction, anyways.
Yeah, they can be a gigantic distraction. They're also one of the most miraculous and amazing set of tools that any age of humankind has ever had access to. I think the fact that you can get all the information from any library in the world within 5 seconds is astonishing. I mean, anybody who served at the Library of Alexandria, their head would probably explode. It's kind of cool. But with that, there are people that get addicted to it. There is actually a symptom, uh, not quite a neurosis, that people get where if they're not having their phone on them, they'll feel the buzz of somebody texting them anyway. They'll have they'll feel the phantom uh, buzz of the ringtone kind of thing on the phone. But one problem with that, I think, is do you have somebody in your life who, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about if there is. Anytime things slow down or anybody has to wait for anything, their phone comes out and they start checking texts. Okay. If it's a guy, the guy usually wears his glasses on the back of his head when he goes inside. And if it's a woman, she usually has like 4 foot long fingernails. Just not really. I'm just those aren't 4 feet. No, but you know
They're
who I'm
definitely
talking
long.
about. That's true. But do you have somebody like that where you're with a group of friends eating at a getting ready sitting waiting for your table at a restaurant, and the other friend with you would rather check their phone and hold this fake conversation with somebody who's not in the room when you went out of your way to be there with them? Do you know what I mean? That kind of you, and you have somebody in your friend group who's like that. Well, one of the problems is when people use their phone to avoid thinking, then that's when creativity is sapped. And Bob Proctor was somebody who said that um, 95% of everybody in the world would rather do anything they can do to avoid thinking. And because thinking becomes a little bit of a scary type of thing. And it is true that our brain, one of the things that helps our brains to function in a healthy manner is for us to generate habits that are sets of activities. Like you usually don't have to think through every step of the process when you get up in the morning and brush your teeth, right? Because your brain sets that has that set of parameters of activities, and you almost do that in on automatic days almost because you don't have to think about them. But one of the problems with people who start becoming addicted to social media and their smartphones is that they get into a habit of checking Facebook for things that are engaging or interesting as opposed to being interested or engaged in whatever's around them. And it's not because necessarily they're trying to hide from reality. I think more often than not, it's just it begins with you generally are interested to see what people are thinking, and that grows develops into a habit, and then the habit becomes one of these sets of routines you just do automatically without even thinking about it. But what's sad is that really kind of relieves you of the burden of intentional thinking, doesn't it? Now, on the other hand, I mean, you can check your email, you can write emails, you can write text. There's all sorts of software where you can do sketches and take notes on your phone. You can use the phone for an almost unlimited array of activities to help with creativity and to help actually be productive. But there is one of the side effects of being addicted to that smartphone kind of thing and avoiding interaction is people stop paying attention to how they respond in text or how they respond in emails. And then that lack of attention becomes how they write their papers. I mean, I've had students before who had no idea that when they were writing an email to somebody, they sounded incredibly rude and bullying because they had gotten so into the habit of this vacuous lack of thinking using their smartphone that they weren't even aware that part of living together in a society is using proper grammar and being polite. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I'm talking about? And it's really kind of sad because, like I said, there are these tools that we have that are just absolutely amazing to help with creativity, and it's pretty easy to reclaim that. If you find yourself waiting and you're the first person at a restaurant waiting for the rest of your friends to show up, and you know you're going to be there, you had to get there because you drew the short straw and had to get the table, ask for the table. But you know you're going to be there for at least 10 minutes before anybody else shows up. One thing that can be kind of fun is instead of checking social media, do, or when you do check social media, look for something you can research and just Google it and start thinking about it. And that can be as innocuous as uh, looking up kind of creative knitting patterns if something like that flashes up on the Facebook. But it can be as kind of cool as going down different rabbit holes about stuff that is just fantastic. Like the people that seem to disappear in slot canyons in Utah that are at the end of a group of people. Everybody else turns a corner, then they look back, and their friend that was right behind them has disappeared. But since it's a slot canyon, they can see all the way to the end. There's absolutely no place the person can go. I think there's been, in the last 20 years, there's been about 5 or 6 disappearances like that in Utah national parks. And that would be kind of an interesting thing to just start looking up. And but doing something like that, whether or not you do, doing something like that and starts engaging the curious part of your brain, and engaging your curiosity is one of the things that opens the door to creativity. So if you're interested about that, you can look up David Paulides and 411 on YouTube, and there's some really interesting stuff about that. But the video, so that's I talked about the article for a lot longer than the article is going to take you to read the article. But the video is kind of an interesting one. I think it's about 15, 17 minutes, something like that. The guy talks about slow motion multitasking. About 15 years ago, multitasking was the rage for up and coming professionals. They thought everybody could do it. What's the big falsity about multitasking? What's actually happening?
You're not like focusing so much on one thing. I think the way I understood it is you're focused on so many other things you can't focus on one and get that done. Is that
Yeah, yeah, that's a big part of it. And the other part of it is that your brain will focus on one thing, and it will have to reset itself to focus on the other thing, then reset itself to focus on that first thing again. So you're even though you think consciously, you're able to do all these things at once. Your brain is having a hard time um, keeping up with what you're focusing on because it has to reset itself and remember what you were doing previously in that same activity. And so there are some examples when you can multitask that are good. Like a lot of the times, if you're listening to music where you don't have to pay attention to the words, you can something with not a really powerful beat, but a consistent beat has actually been shown to help you retain focus when you do your homework or when you're reading. Some of the better ones are finding music that has a regular beat that has somewhat mathematical underpinning to it. Some of the best one is uh, classical music from the time of Mozart. So Baroque type music. Um, Ragtime is also a good one if you get that slowed down. There is some really cool, very interesting beats in rap out of Algeria and France that are really fascinating. Um, but that kind of a music where you don't have to focus on the words, like music in another language that you don't know, or that has that kind of a beat, can actually help your brain to settle into focusing on your homework. So that's a good example of multitasking. But what he's talking about slow motion multitasking is this guy was saying that the same year that Albert Einstein released the paper where he talks about energy and the speed of light, he released 3 other papers that were just as important. And most scientists that have to, and academics that have to keep publishing papers to stay on top of things and be recognized in the world, in their chosen field, they won't just settle on one topic that they spend their whole life studying. Is that the average is not even 4 or 5. The average is closer to over a 30 or 40 year career. These folks will be hopping around to an average of about 43 different subjects. 43. He says what's going on is the slow motion multitasking is the idea, and you guys are actually doing it already, and you don't even realize it, where you are studying and thinking about several different subjects, but you get to a place of calm with one and go to another one and allow that first subject to settle in the back of your head so it helps inform you as you are looking at other subjects. So, say for example, your course load this semester, you're doing nursing, engineering, uh, golf, and music theory. Okay, that which is a really I know a lot of students that have as weird of a setup like that for their classes. But what's interesting is that as you are keeping track of what each class is doing, you're focusing as you do your work for each class, you're focusing on that class itself. But as you move to other subjects, you are on some level being informed on how to approach that subject by the things you learned on with different subjects. And the idea of purposeful slow motion multitasking is to do that with intent. So, Cheyenne, what kind of different classes are you taking this semester?
I'm taking a growing with parents, like communications and learning children's books kind
Well,
of
and those
class.
on the surface they may look like they're different things, but they're all different avenues or pathways of that middle one you mentioned about communication. They're all different ways of communicating.
Yeah.
And so, the parenting one, the working with parents one, can also help inform you with the children's literature one.
Yeah.
You know, which is really helpful because a lot of the times, children's literature is either completely and totally vapid, where it's all about what the author thinks the child wants to read, or else they are just I want to use a really derogatory term for it, but they are completely dismissive of the child's need to be a child and want to be, big air quote educational. And the best books are the ones like what Dr. Seuss did, where he would use um, wordplay and just out of the box creative imagery, and the children would be entertained and they wouldn't be realizing that they were also learning quite a bit about literature and grammar and how society works and communication, all that together. So that's a really good setup. But can you see how where you apply this idea of the slow motion multitasking, it can really help inform how you approach each of the subjects by using the things that you learn from the other subjects that may not necessarily be on the surface completely connected.
Yeah.
I and that's just one example that we pulled out of our ear. But so creativity is, I think the key is deciding to want to be more creative and not being upset with yourself for not being what you assume a quote unquote creative person needs to be. I mean, I wear my hippie shirts because I'm a professor and it's part of the imagery, it's part of the branding. And but you don't have to wear hippie shirts to be creative. Is what I'm saying. Um, so as you go through that, as you watch that video and read that article, just kind of think about that and see if there are ways that it can apply to you. I wanted to talk about the assignment, because those we just talked about the first two things that we needed to, and the last bit I just wanted to talk about the second assignment. The first assignment, well, I want to talk about the first assignment too. I guess it's kind of a creative thinking using junk that you find in your own home, and it's there's a little bit of collaboration as well, where I want you to read that assignment. There's several steps to it, but every once in a while I ask you to show what you're doing to somebody that shares an environment with you, and get their input and think about it. Don't dismiss it out of hand, and don't blindly take it, but at least consider it. Because that will help with part of being creative is also being able to appreciate other people's point of view, whether or not you understand or agree with them. I think it was Plato who said the mark of the educated mind is to be able to entertain thoughts that are not yours. So being able to even defend um, packages of ideas that you don't necessarily agree with, because you're able to hold that in. And this exercise, kind of collaborating with somebody, allowing them to inform your thinking, um, kind of addresses that a little bit. And what you're doing is basically look at the junk that you have. I don't want anybody to buy anything new. Look at the junk that you have and see if there's something that you can make. And I'm not expecting it to be a working prototype, more of a model, and that addresses some sort of a need or a problem. And it can be life size, it can be a scale to scale. It can be something where you take a lot of pieces of paper and cardboard and cut them up. One person made a fridge. It was out of painted cardboard, but it was supposed to look like it was out of wood. So that they made a model of something like that. And during this process, just read the directions, and during the process, engage the people around you and see what they think you should be doing. And like I said, if you don't want to use their suggestion, try really hard to be kind. Like you don't want to tell them to take a hike because you asked them to take a moment to give you their opinion, but you don't have to take their advice blindly either. Okay. And then that whole process, you're gonna make a list of items and ideas. You're going to take a picture of that, and then you're also going to submit a photo of what you ended up making and a short write up about it. Okay. Then the other thing is the artist list, and there's 85 artists on the list. There's essentially 3 steps to this. The first step is I want you to take a post-it note and write down 10 self-identifiers, 10 things that help you to feel like you are who you are. You're never going to show that with anybody. You're never going to read that to anybody. It is entirely for you. You're articulating the things that make you uniquely you. When you're done making that list, think about it, then burn it twice, mix it with toilet bowl cleaner, and flush it twice so that nobody can ever see what it is. But that's good. That's going to be in the back of your head and inform you as you look at these artists. Now, this list of 85 artists, there is, at the beginning, there's 6 groups of artists, and each of those you're going to pick 2. And then there's the rest of the artists, and I think there's about 40 other artists, and from that group you're going to pick 8. So you have 12 artists altogether. And for each artist, you're going to take the name, you're going to go to uh, DuckDuckGo or Google or anything like that. You're going to type in the artist name, and you're going to add the word art, and just do an image search. Then find an image of their work that you respond to, pull that up, and what you'll do is write down on a line the artist's name, the name of the title of the work, and then a 5 to 8 word description. And that's it. Then you move on to the next artist. And let's see. I'll give you an example really quick. Here we go. It's in module 3, and other artists who express their creativity is the section that it's under. And if you scroll down, you'll see the list of artists. First group 1 has the artist name are Andy Goldsworthy, Sandy Skoglund, Thomas Allen, Slinkachu, Isaac Cordell, Patrick Dougherty, Mariko Mori, and Francis Alice. I'm going to pick Mariko Mori and Francis Alice. So what I'm going to do in my search, I'm going to type in Mariko Mori art. Then I'll look up that and I'll say, oh, well, there's a Holy Land Buddha is kind of a cool image. I'm gonna do that. I'll pull that image up, find out what the real title is, put that in, and then write a short description. And then I'll go to Francis Alice, and moving mountains will be something that shows up when I hit art, and I'll look at that 3-minute video about it. It's a it's where he got like over several hundred volunteers, and they actually went to a mountain in Mexico that was a long sand dune, and they moved it 2 feet using shovels, and that's it. They actually moved a feature of the permanent landscape 2 feet, and years later, people that have participated said that that was the thing that made them decide to take ownership over their lives because they realized that they had a specific effect on the world environment. So and there's different artists too, but that's what you do. So you just have a short line, and when you're all done with that, that's one of the parts. Then the last part of it is you're going to pick one of those 20 artists that you looked at who is not like you in some way, but whose work you respond to. And it could be as simple as Slinket Chu is a financial analyst that lives in the UK. That's not like me, but I like his work. And it could be as simple as that. And you'll just write down this is the artist that I'm picking that I'm going to do my research on later on. Now later in the semester you're going to do an annotated bibliography, and you're going to make a PowerPoint that you'll record in a video, so that the video will be seeing the slides as they move, as they go from slide to slide, and then you'll talk about it, what you learned, and then and that's, but you're not going to be doing that now. That's for the rest of that's uh, I think next month we'll do the annotated bibliography. The month after that we'll do the PowerPoint. And so all you have, that's what you're responsible for. That list of 10 self-identifiers that you're going to flush down the toilet, not because I'm invalidating who you think you are, but because that's how we maintain secrecy. And then you're going to look up a piece of artwork for each of the 20 artists that you pick, and then you're going to pick one of those that you want to do further research on. You don't have to do the further research necessarily. You can look up some more work for them just to get in your head, oh yeah, I like this person, I want to learn more about them. But all I want you to do is submit that artist's name and maybe a short explanation of why you picked them. That's it. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. Oh, there's just I wanted to ask a question too. We talked about being creative. We talked about convergent and divergent thinking. We talked about different ways to kind of manufacture creativity. Is there a time of day that you feel like you're more creative than other times?
Not really.
Is that because you're always like so creative that it's nauseating for other people to be around you? Or is it
I am
because
not creative even a little bit. No, terrible.
well, I think that there are going to be times of the day that maybe are a little bit better than others. I don't know, but can you think of any activities that might help that would boost the creativity? And I'll give you a couple ideas of what I'm thinking about. For me, if I'm working on window designs, what I have to do is I have to look up reference material at night. Then I have to rest on it, and then the next morning I start drawing. That seems to work for me. And so there are definitely some parts of the day where I'm more creative than others. Other things that help sometimes if I just cannot break through. You guys have that ever have the mental fog kind of thing going on where you just cannot think straight? You
All day
can't
long.
concentrate. Yeah. Have you ever had that? What's that?
I said all day long.
Sometimes what I'll do is just go for a walk or a drive, and that does seem to kind of clear my head a little bit. But what's particularly fun, if I am in a serious funk, I will take a trip to like an antique store or a place like. Have you guys been to Gypsy Emporium in Hurricane?
Yeah, yeah, I live by it.
It is awesome, and I love to go through there. My wife gets kind of. She's not. She won't say that she's annoyed with me, but yeah, I'm kind of getting those vibes. But we'll go through, and a lot of those things will spark different ideas. And the ideas that they spark kind of set and fester in the back of my head, just like mold on cheese. And then anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour later, something coalesces, and then there's an idea that forms, or the solution is starting to present itself, or I can see the outline of what's going to lead to a solution just because. And I think somebody in yesterday's class said it pretty well. It upsets the routine, and it kind of jumbles up the brain a little bit and helps you get out of that the habitual routines of thinking. What are some of the things that you do when you have to come up with some ideas for like a group discussion in class the next day, or writing a paper or research that you have to do for one of your courses? What are some of the things that you do to kind of clear your head and get in the mental space so you can start essentially brainstorming?
I think one thing that helps me is I'll step away from that planning and go work on something completely different. Most of the time it's not school related. And then I'll come back after a while and make sure it's like I have to have a dead quiet, no distractions. But then I can sit down and actually try and work through whatever it is I'm trying to achieve.
That's excellent. I've heard that a lot with neuroscientists. They said that that's one of the best ways to do that, to deal with something that's completely different. And it, on one level, it allows your subconscious to work with some of the issues, but on another, what happens is our brain, the more we think about things, the more we think about our thinking, and the more we relate things to each other, the more cemented the pathways in our brain get. And by stepping away and doing that, it kind of loosens the plaque, so to speak, and allows us to think in a more fresh manner. So that's excellent. How about you, Cheyenne? What do you do?
I clean. Like if it's dirty around me, I like try and clean everything away from me and then like make my room organized so it's like calm space.
Well, that's pretty
But
cool too. Why do you think that works?
I get really overly stimulated when a lot is happening.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's very cool. I love your fingernails, by the way. Um,
Thank you. They're very long.
but those are things to think about as you go through this, and just kind of keep in the back of your head these kinds of solutions, like what Cheyenne said, what Jackson said. Think about those kinds of solutions, and you may do the same thing you always do for to help you see something with fresh eyes, but you may also borrow from somebody else's solution, and that's perfectly fine as well. Like if cleaning does not do it for you, then go and do something completely different. And I one of the reasons why people like to take this class is that they hope to become more creative, and but that really comes down to the choices you make. But you can't make the choices that will lead to that solution without knowing what the options are. And hopefully that's what this module will kind of introduce you to. What kind of options there are that you can use to help yourself express uh, greater creativity or feel like you're more creative. So it is something that can be a learned skill. So excellent. Do you guys have any questions for me or anything?
I don't think so.
I'm also good, I
Okay.
think.
All right, great. So I'm going to, as soon as this is downloaded onto YouTube, I will put it into the attendance module for this week. And this week is January 23rd is the week. So the weeks start on Monday, then everything is due the following Sunday. And again, the due dates are there just to help people with Canvas, reminding them that stuff is coming up. And if you see zeros, it's just because the due date is like at least a week past, and it's just to remind you that something was due. It's again, I don't deduct points if it's late because oh my gosh, you guys have real world lives. That's why you're taking an online class. And this is an art class. It's not like nuclear physics or anything that's like world shattering. So I don't want you guys to be super stressed out. But if you do see zeros, all it is to remind you, is for Canvas to send you a note saying, hey, this thing was due. All right. So do not stress out. All right, everybody. I hope you guys have an awesome week. Next week, we're going to be introduced a little bit more to the original Lion King, Sundiata. And we're going to look at art of the Mali Empire and use your critical thinking skills to kind of start the road to describing and appreciating stuff that is pretty much very alien to most people's experience. All right. So that's what we're going to have to look forward to. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you guys next Wednesday.
Thank you. See you next Wednesday.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you.